The alarm screamed through the pre-dawn darkness at Nellis Air Force Base, its shrill cry cutting through the Nevada desert like a blade through silk. Captain Maya Phoenix Rodriguez rolled out of her narrow bunk, her bare feet hitting the cold concrete floor with practiced silence. 3:47 a.m. The red digital numbers on her clock seemed to pulse with the same urgency that now coursed through her veins. Preparo y narrar este tipo de historia, nos ha lavado largos esfuerzos. Y trabajo duro. Así que si estás disfrutando de la historia, por favor, considera suscribir a nuestro canal. Outside her barracks window, the flight line stretched endlessly under harsh sodium lights. Rows of F-35 Lightning II fighters sitting like sleeping predators in the amber glow. Each aircraft represented 30 years of cutting-edge technology, $80 million of American engineering, and the dreams of every pilot who had ever looked up at contrails scratched across an endless sky. Maya had dreamed of this moment since she was 7 years old, watching her father's F-16 disappear into storm clouds over their small Texas airfield. The scramble alert meant one thing: live combat exercise, full weapons systems, real-world scenarios that would separate the rookies from the aces. Maya's hands moved with automatic precision as she pulled on her flight suit, the familiar weight of the Nomex fabric settling around her shoulders like armor. The patches on her chest told her story in small, embroidered chapters: Top Gun graduate, Weapons Systems Officer certification, Advanced Tactical Training. But tonight, she was still fighting for the patch that mattered most: combat-ready status. Phoenix, move your ass. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Jake Viper Morrison, her wingman and closest friend in the squadron. His South Carolina drawl carried even more urgency than usual as he hammered on her door. Colonel wants the Dream Team airborne in 20 minutes. Something big is going down. Maya grabbed her helmet from its hook, running her thumb over the small photograph tucked inside the visor. Her younger sister Sophia, 8 years old, gap-toothed smile bright as summer sunshine. Sophia believed her big sister could do anything. Fly anywhere, break any barrier that dared stand in her way. Maya had never told her about the meetings with Colonel James "Iceman" Bradley, the squadron commander whose steel-gray eyes seemed to look right through her every time she entered his office. The briefing room buzzed with controlled chaos when Maya burst through the doors, her boots echoing against the polished floor. 24 of the Air Force's finest pilots filled the chairs, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of tactical displays. Each one had fought tooth and nail for their place in this elite squadron, but Maya knew she fought harder than most. She was one of only 3 women in the room, and the only one who hadn't yet earned combat certification. Colonel Bradley stood at the front of the room like a monument to military precision. His silver hair was cut regulation short, his uniform pressed to mathematical perfection, his bearing that of a man who had seen combat in 3 different conflicts and emerged each time with another star on his shoulder. When his eyes found Maya in the crowd, she felt the familiar chill that came with his disapproval. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bradley's voice carried the authority of absolute command, "what you're about to hear is classified at the highest levels. Satellite intelligence has detected unusual activity in the disputed airspace over the South China Sea. Our allies in the region have requested immediate tactical support. This is not a drill." The room fell silent except for the distant hum of air conditioning and the soft rustle of flight suits. Maya felt her heart rate spike as she processed the implications. Real combat. Live missiles. Enemy aircraft with pilots who wouldn't hesitate to paint her F-35 across 50 miles of ocean. Bradley clicked his remote, and a tactical map filled the massive screen behind him. Red dots marked hostile positions, blue triangles showed friendly forces, and a green line traced the route that would take them 1,500 miles from the safety of Nevada into international waters where diplomatic immunity meant nothing and survival depended entirely on skill, training, and luck. The mission profile is simple, Bradley continued, his laser pointer dancing across the screen. Establish air superiority over the disputed zone. Neutralize any threats to Allied shipping. Return with all aircraft and personnel intact. Major Thompson will lead Alpha Flight. Captain Morrison will take Bravo Flight, Charlie Flight. His eyes found Maya again, and she saw something that made her stomach tighten with dread. Charlie Flight will remain on standby for base defense. The words hit Maya like a physical blow. Base defense. While her squadron mates flew into combat, she would be circling the airfield like a security guard, watching for threats that would never come while the real action happened 1,000 miles away. Around her, she could feel the eyes of her fellow pilots, some sympathetic, others relieved that they wouldn't have to worry about the rookie in a real fight. "Sir," Maya's voice carried across the room before she could stop herself. Every head turned toward her, and she felt the weight of 24 stares like physical pressure against her chest. "Request permission to speak." Colonel Bradley's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Go ahead, Captain Rodriguez." Maya stood, her knees steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Sir, I've logged more simulation hours than any pilot in this squadron. My weapons system scores are in the 98th percentile. I've completed every advanced training module the Air Force offers. I respectfully request assignment to a combat flight." The silence stretched like a taut wire. Maya could hear her own heartbeat, could smell the coffee and nervous sweat that filled the room, could feel the career she'd worked 12 years to build hanging in the balance of the next few seconds. Bradley's expression never changed, but when he spoke, his voice carried the chill of Arctic wind. "Captain Rodriguez, combat aviation isn't about test scores or simulator runs. It's about split-second decisions under unimaginable pressure. It's about the ability to take a life or lose your own in the time it takes to blink, and frankly ... He paused, letting his words settle over the room like ash after an explosion. "I've never met a woman who could handle that kind of pressure without falling apart." The statement hung in the air like a challenge flag. Maya felt her face flush, felt the familiar fire that had driven her through flight school, through weapons training, through every obstacle that had tried to block her path to this moment. Around the room, she saw reactions ranging from shock to anger to uncomfortable agreement. But what hurt most was the silence from her fellow pilots, men and women who had shared countless hours in the cockpit with her, but now sat mute when she needed them most. "Sir, with all due respect," Maya began. "Captain Rodriguez," Bradley's voice cut through her words like a blade through butter, "you're dismissed. Report to base operations for standby duty assignment. We'll discuss your ... concerns ... after the mission." Maya felt her legs move automatically, carrying her from the briefing room while her mind reeled with the injustice of it all. Behind her, she heard the colonel resume his briefing, his voice already moving on to technical details about payload configurations and tactical formations. She had become irrelevant, invisible, a problem to be dealt with later while the real pilots handled the real work. The corridor outside the briefing room stretched endlessly in both directions, harsh fluorescent lights casting everything in stark shadows. Maya pressed her back against the cool concrete wall and closed her eyes, fighting back tears that would only confirm every stereotype that had followed her throughout her career. In her mind, she could see Sophia's disappointed face, could hear her father's voice telling her that some dreams were too big for little girls from small Texas towns. But then she remembered something else, the weight of the F-35 stick in her hands, the feeling of breaking the sound barrier at 40,000 feet, the absolute certainty that came when machine and pilot merged into something greater than the sum of their parts. She had been born to fly, born to fight, born to prove that courage and skill had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with the fire that burned in a pilot's heart. Maya opened her eyes and pushed herself away from the wall. If Colonel Bradley wanted to keep her on the ground, he was welcome to try. But she had spent too many years fighting for her place in the squadron to give up now. Somewhere in the maze of regulations and procedures that governed military aviation, there had to be a way to prove herself. She just had to find a dot as she walked toward base operations. Maya's mind was already racing ahead to the possibilities. The standby assignment meant she'd be fully armed and fueled, ready to launch at a moment's notice. And if something went wrong during the mission, if one of the combat flights needed immediate support, she would be the closest pilot to the action. Maya Rodriguez had been underestimated her entire life. Tomorrow night, 1,500 miles from home with the lives of her squadron mates hanging in the balance, Colonel Bradley was about to learn exactly how much that had cost him. Maya's footsteps echoed through the empty corridors as she made her way to the pilot's lounge, her mind churning with frustration and determination in equal measure. The base felt different at this hour, quieter, more intimate, as if the massive military installation had shed its daytime facade to reveal something more human underneath. She pushed through the heavy doors into the sanctuary that had become her second home over the past 18 months. The lounge was a study in controlled chaos. Flight manuals and technical updates were scattered across every available surface, mixed with half-empty coffee cups and the detritus of lives lived at 35,000 feet. The walls were covered with squadron photographs dating back to the Vietnam War, generations of pilots staring down from their frames, with the same mixture of confidence and vulnerability that Maya saw in her own reflection every morning. She settled into her usual chair-cracked leather that had probably supported a dozen pilots before her, and pulled out her tablet to review the night's mission parameters. But her concentration was broken by the soft sound of footsteps in the corridor outside. Maya looked up to see Master Sergeant Elena Vasquez peering through the doorway, her weathered face creased with concern. Elena had been the squadron's senior NCO for nearly 2 decades, a tough-as-nails aircraft mechanic who could diagnose engine problems by listening to the sound of a jet's idle. She'd taken Maya under her wing from day one, offering guidance that went far beyond technical matters. "Rough night, Captain?" Elena asked, stepping into the lounge and closing the door behind her. She moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had been shaped by years of crawling through aircraft maintenance bays, her small frame belying the strength that came from wrestling with multi-ton fighter jets. Maya managed a weak smile. "Just the usual. Colonel Bradley thinks I'm better suited for base defense than actual combat. Apparently, women can't handle the pressure." Elena's laugh was bitter as desert wind, that old song and dance. "You know, I've been fixing jets since before Bradley was flying them. Seen plenty of hotshot pilots, male and female, crack under pressure, and I've seen others rise to occasions that would break most people." She settled into the chair across from Maya, her dark eyes serious. "Want to know what I think makes a good combat pilot? Enlighten me. It's not the swagger or the bravado. It's not even the technical skills, though those matter. It's the ability to hold multiple realities in your head at once. The mission objectives, the threat assessment, your aircraft's capabilities, your wingman's position, the weather, fuel status, weapons load. And underneath all of that, the knowledge that people are counting on you to make the right decision every single time." Maya nodded, recognizing the description. It was exactly how she felt in the cockpit, hyper-aware, connected to every system and situation simultaneously, thinking 10 moves ahead like a chess grandmaster playing for her life. "I can do all of that, Elena. I know I can. But Bradley won't give me the chance to prove it." Elena leaned forward, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. "Then maybe it's time to stop asking for permission and start taking what you've earned." Before Maya could respond, the lounge door swung open again, admitting Lieutenant Morrison. His usually cheerful demeanor was subdued, his shoulders carrying the weight of what had happened in the briefing room. He grabbed 2 cups from the coffee maker, filling both with the thick black liquid that kept night shift operations running. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering Maya one of the cups. The coffee was terrible bitter and over-extracted, but she accepted it gratefully. Jake Morrison had been her closest friend since flight school, the one person in the squadron who never seemed to doubt her abilities. He came from old Air Force stock. His grandfather had flown B-17s over Germany. His father had been a phantom pilot in Vietnam. Military aviation was in his DNA, but he'd never let that history make him dismissive of others who'd had to fight harder for their place in the sky. "That was bullshit in there," he said bluntly, settling into a third chair. "Complete and utter bullshit. You're a better pilot than half the guys on this mission." "Half?" Maya raised an eyebrow, managing her first real smile of the night. "Okay, 3/4, maybe 7/8." His grin was infectious, but it faded quickly as he continued. "Look, I know this isn't fair, but Bradley's not completely wrong about combat being different from training. It is. Everything happens faster, the stakes are higher, and there's no reset button if you make a mistake." "Are you trying to make me feel better or worse?" Maya asked. "I'm trying to be honest with you. Because when you get your chance, you need to be ready for how different it feels when someone's actually trying to kill you." Elena stood up, brushing imaginary dust from her uniform. "Speaking of getting ready, Captain Rodriguez, your aircraft's been prepped for standby duty. Full weapons load, extra fuel. If anything happens during the mission, you'll be the first one they call." After Elena left, Maya and Jake sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside the windows, the first hints of dawn were beginning to creep across the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Soon, the base would come alive with the organized chaos of a major operation. But for now, they existed in a pocket of calm before the storm. "Tell me about the first time you flew combat," Maya said quietly. Jake's face grew distant, his eyes focusing on something beyond the walls of the lounge. "Afghanistan, 2019. Close air support for a ground unit that had walked into an ambush. By the time I got on station, they were taking heavy fire from 3 different directions. The controller on the radio." He paused, his voice catching slightly. He sounded like he was about 16 years old. Scared out of his mind but trying to stay professional while bullets were snapping over his head. Maya waited for him to continue, sensing that this was a story he didn't tell often. "The thing is, all the training in the world can't prepare you for that moment when you realize that people are going to live or die based on what you do in the next 30 seconds. I was carrying a full load of ordnance, but the friendlies were so close to the enemy positions that one mistake would have killed the very people I was trying to save." "What did you do?" "I made the runs. 3 separate passes, danger close, threading the needle between our guys and theirs. And afterward, when the smoke cleared and the radio crackled to life with all clear, threat neutralized, I realized I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the stick." Maya absorbed this, understanding why he was sharing it. Combat wasn't about fearlessness, it was about functioning despite fear, making critical decisions while adrenaline flooded your system and the margin for error approached 0. The ground controller came back on the radio a few minutes later, Jake continued. Turned out he wasn't 16. He was a 28-year-old staff sergeant with 2 kids back home. But in that moment, with his unit under fire, he sounded like a scared kid because that's what pressure does to people. It strips away everything except what's essential. And what's essential? The mission, the training, the people counting on you. He looked directly at Maya, his eyes serious. And the absolute refusal to quit when everything goes to hell. Maya nodded, filing away every word. She'd analyzed combat footage and studied after-action reports, but there was something different about hearing it from someone who'd lived through it. The technical aspects of air-to-ground combat were complex enough: weapon systems integration, target acquisition, threat assessment. But the human elements were even more challenging. As the sun climbed higher, the base began to stir around them. Maya could hear the distant whine of jet engines beginning their warm-up cycles, the mechanical symphony that preceded every major operation. Somewhere out there, her fellow pilots were running through their final checks, reviewing target folders, and preparing for a mission that would test everything they'd learned in years of training. And she would be sitting on the ground, watching them disappear into the morning sky while she circled the airfield like a concerned parent waiting for teenagers to come home from their first date. But Maya had learned long ago that life rarely unfolded according to plan. She thought about her father, who'd washed out of pilot training due to a heart murmur discovered during his final physical, but who'd spent the rest of his career as a flight instructor, shaping the next generation of aviators. She thought about her mother, who'd worked 3 jobs to keep the family afloat while pursuing her nursing degree at night school. The Rodriguez family had never been one to accept defeat gracefully. Maya stood up, her decision crystallizing like ice forming on a windshield. If Colonel Bradley wanted to keep her on standby duty, fine. But she was going to be the most prepared standby pilot in Air Force history. She would know every detail of the mission, every contingency, every possible scenario that might require her intervention. And if that chance came when it came, she would be ready to prove that courage had nothing to do with chromosomes and everything to do with the fire that burned in a pilot's heart. The operations center hummed with barely controlled energy as Maya took her position at the standby desk, a metal table equipped with communication, equipment and tactical displays that would keep her connected to every aspect of the unfolding mission. Around her, the nerve center of Nellis Air Force Base orchestrated the complex ballet of modern air warfare controllers, tracked aircraft positions, intelligence analysts updated threat assessments, and weather officers provided constant updates on conditions over the South China Sea. Maya adjusted her headset and watched the main display screen, where 24 blue triangles representing her squadron mates moved steadily westward across the Pacific. Each symbol represented not just an aircraft but a friend, a colleague, someone whose life might depend on split-second decisions made 1,500 miles from home. The weight of being left behind pressed against her chest like a physical force. "Standby 1, this is Control," came the voice of Major Patricia Winters, the operations officer who served as the link between the pilots and command authority. "All flights report normal cruise, ETA, to target area in 4 hours, 37 minutes. Maya keyed her microphone. "Control, Standby 1 copies. Standing by for further instructions." But as the hours passed, Maya found herself fighting a battle against her own emotions. Every radio transmission brought updates from the mission weather reports, fuel status checks, brief tactical communications that spoke to the professional competence of the pilots she'd trained alongside. They were living the dream she'd fought for her entire career while she sat in a climate-controlled room, reduced to the role of observer. The first sign of trouble came at 0800 hours, when Alpha Flight reported unusual radar contacts on the edge of their assigned patrol area. Maya's attention snapped to full focus as she listened to the terse radio exchanges between Flight Lead Major Thompson and his wingman. "Control, Alpha 1. We're showing multiple contacts bearing 270. Range approximately 120 miles. Contacts appear to be military aircraft, heading east toward Allied shipping lanes." Major Winters leaned forward in her chair, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she pulled up additional intelligence data. "Alpha 1, Control. Can you identify aircraft type?" "Negative, Control. Too far for visual identification, but radar signature suggests fighter-sized aircraft. Recommend we move to investigate." Maya felt her pulse quicken. This was exactly the kind of scenario she'd trained for: hostile aircraft threatening Allied assets in disputed waters. requiring immediate tactical response. Her hands moved automatically to her equipment, checking systems that had been powered. Up for hours, making sure everything was ready for immediate launch if called upon. But the call didn't come. Instead, she watched on the tactical display as Alpha Flight altered course to investigate the contacts, leaving a gap in the coverage. Area that her own aircraft could have filled in minutes. If she'd been airborne, the situation deteriorated rapidly over the next hour. The unidentified contacts proved to be hostile fighters' Chinese J-20 stealth aircraft that had apparently been testing Allied response times and capabilities. What started as a reconnaissance mission quickly escalated into a complex game of aerial chess, with both sides maneuvering for tactical advantage while carefully avoiding the kind of direct confrontation that could trigger a larger conflict. Alpha 1, be advised you have multiple radar contacts converging on your position. Count 6. No, 8 hostile aircraft approaching from multiple vectors. Maya's heart hammered as she listened to the radio chatter. 8 against 4 were terrible odds, even for pilots as skilled as her squadron mates. She found herself gripping the edge of the desk, every instinct screaming at her to launch immediately and provide support. But Colonel Bradley's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. Control, this is Overlord. Standby 1 is to remain on station unless specifically ordered otherwise. We're not escalating this situation by adding untested pilots to an already complex tactical environment. The words hit Maya like a physical blow. Untested. As if 12 years of training and preparation meant nothing. As if the hundreds of hours she'd logged in various aircraft were somehow less valuable because they hadn't included live weapons. Releases against hostile targets. Master Sergeant Vasquez appeared at Maya's shoulder, having emerged from the maintenance bay where she'd been monitoring aircraft systems. This is getting ugly fast, she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. 8 against 4, and those J-20s are no joke. Your boys are going to need help. Maya nodded, her jaw clenched with frustration. On the display, she could see the hostile aircraft spreading into an attack formation, using their superior numbers to create multiple threat vectors that would be almost impossible to defend against simultaneously. Basic air combat tactics called for immediately reinforcing the outnumbered flight, but politics and prejudice kept her chained to the ground. The next hour unfolded like a nightmare in slow motion. Bravo Flight was diverted to support Alpha Flight, leaving only Charlie Flight to maintain the original patrol pattern. But the hostile aircraft proved to be more numerous and better coordinated than initial intelligence had suggested. What had started as a simple show of force was rapidly escalating into the kind of multi-domain conflict that could reshape geopolitical relationships across the Pacific. Control, Alpha 1. We're being painted by multiple fire control radars. These guys are serious about mixing it up. Alpha 1, Control. Rules of engagement remain in effect. Do not fire unless fired upon, but you are authorized to defend yourselves. Maya listened to the exchanges with growing alarm. Being painted by fire control radar meant the hostile aircraft were actively targeting her friends, preparing to launch missiles that could cover the distance between aircraft in seconds. The rules of engagement sounded reasonable in theory, but in practice, they meant American pilots would have to absorb the first attack before defending themselves. The turning point came when Charlie Flight reported a new problem. Control, Charlie 1. We've got surface contacts moving into the shipping lanes. Looks like coordinated action aircraft above, ships below. This isn't just a probe anymore. Maya felt her world narrow to the tactical display in front of her, where the symbols representing her squadron mates moved in increasingly desperate patterns. The hostile forces were implementing a classic multi-domain strategy: air assets to establish local superiority, surface vessels to threaten commercial shipping, creating a crisis that would force American forces to either escalate or withdraw. Control. Charlie 1, came the increasingly urgent voice of Captain Sarah Chun, leading the southernmost flight. We've got multiple missile launches from the surface contacts. Recommend immediate defensive action. The radio exploded with voices as the situation deteriorated beyond anyone's worst-case scenarios. Maya listened to her friends coordinating defensive maneuvers, calling out threats, managing weapon systems while flying complex patterns designed to defeat incoming missiles. Each transmission brought fresh evidence that the mission was spiraling beyond the capacity of the assigned forces. But the moment that changed everything came when Alpha Flight's number 4 aircraft, Lieutenant Rebecca Hawk Santos, reported a critical system failure. Alpha 1, Hawk, I'm showing multiple warning lights. Engine temperature climbing, hydraulics failing. I don't think I can maintain formation much longer. Maya knew Santos well, a quiet, methodical pilot from California whose technical expertise was matched only by her courage. If Hawk was reporting system failures in the middle of a tactical engagement, the situation was desperate. A damaged aircraft became a liability to the entire formation, requiring other pilots to provide protection while simultaneously dealing with their own tactical challenges. Hawk, Alpha 1, can you make it to the recovery tanker? Negative lead. I'm losing altitude and I've got warning lights across the board. I don't think this bird's going to make it home. Maya's hands moved to her equipment without conscious thought. She began powering up systems, running through pre-flight checks that she could perform in her sleep. Around her, the operations center buzzed with activity as controllers tried to coordinate a complex rescue operation while maintaining tactical awareness of the broader engagement. But Colonel Bradley's voice cut through the chaos like a sword. Through silk, control, Overlord. Standby 1 will remain on station. We have tanker aircraft and search and rescue assets available if needed. Maya keyed her microphone before she could stop herself. Control, Standby 1. I'm 15 minutes from the engagement area. I can provide immediate escort for the damaged aircraft and reinforce the tactical formation. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Maya could feel the eyes of everyone in the operations center focused on her, could sense the tension between operational necessity and command authority. In that moment, she realized she was challenging more than just a tactical decision. She was confronting decades of assumptions about women in combat aviation, about command authority, about who belonged in the sky when bullets started flying. Colonel Bradley's response was ice cold and absolute. Standby 1, you will remain on station. That is a direct order. Maya stared at the tactical display, watching the symbols that represented her friends maneuvering in increasingly desperate patterns. Lieutenant Santos was limping southward on a failing aircraft, while the rest of Alpha Flight tried to maintain combat effectiveness while protecting their wounded wingmen. Charlie Flight was dealing with surface-to-air missiles from hostile ships, and Bravo Flight was outnumbered nearly 3-1 by advanced enemy fighters. Every instinct she possessed, every hour of training she'd endured, every dream she'd nurtured since childhood screamed at her to launch immediately. The tactical situation demanded immediate reinforcement, and she was the closest pilot to the action. But military discipline held her in place, the weight of 12 years of service and the promise of a career that could end with a single act of insubordination. Master Sergeant Vasquez appeared at her side again, her face grim as she monitored the radio traffic. Captain, your aircraft's been fully prepped for the last 6 hours. Full weapons load, maximum fuel. If you need to launch. She paused, letting the implications sink in. All the paperwork shows you're ready to go at a moment's notice. Maya understood the subtext. Alina was telling her that if she chose to launch without authorization, her aircraft would be ready. The maintenance logs would show she'd been prepared for immediate deployment. The decision and the consequences would be entirely her own. The radio, Lieutenant Santos's voice was growing weaker as her aircraft continued to fail around her. Alpha 1, Hawk, I'm not sure how much longer I can maintain altitude. If I have to eject, I'll be floating in the middle of a combat zone with hostile aircraft overhead." The image hit Maya like a physical blow. Santos in a life raft, vulnerable and alone, while enemy fighters circled overhead and her friends fought desperately to reach her. It was exactly the kind of scenario that haunted every military pilot, not dying in glorious aerial combat, but drowning slowly in hostile waters while help remained just beyond reach. Maya's decision crystallized in that moment, as clear and sharp as winter sunlight. She had spent her entire career following orders, proving herself worthy of inclusion in an organization that seemed determined to find reasons to exclude her. She had endured lectures about regulations and procedures, about the importance of chain of command and the dangers of independent action. But sitting in the operations center while her friends faced death alone, Maya realized that some principles were more important than regulations. Some fights were too important to wait for permission. She stood up from the desk, her movements calm and deliberate, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Around her, the operations center continued its controlled chaos, controllers and analysts focused on their screens and radios. No one seemed to notice as she walked toward the exit, her flight helmet tucked under her arm. "Where are you going, Captain?" Major Winters called out as Maya reached the door. Maya turned back, her voice steady and clear. "To do my job." The Nevada morning air was crisp and thin as Maya strode across the flight line toward her F-35, her boots striking the concrete with the rhythm of absolute determination. Each step carried her further from the safety of following orders and deeper into the unknown territory of command decision. Behind her, she could hear voices calling from the operations center, but she didn't turn around. There would be time for explanations later, if she survived what was coming. Her aircraft sat under the harsh glow of the flight, line lights like a technological predator waiting to be unleashed. The F-35 Sea Lightning II was the most advanced fighter aircraft ever built, a fusion of stealth technology, advanced sensors, and devastating firepower that represented the cutting edge of military aviation. As Maya approached, she could see Master Sergeant Vasquez conducting a final walk-around inspection, her experienced eyes checking every access panel, every sensor, every weapon mounting point. "Everything looks perfect, Captain," Alina said as Maya climbed the ladder to the cockpit. Full load of AMRAAM missiles, cannon ammunition maxed out, extra fuel tanks. "This bird's ready to fight." Maya settled into the ejection seat, the familiar embrace of the cockpit closing around her like a second skin. Her hands moved through the startup sequence with automatic precision battery power. Engine start, systems checks, weapons initialization. Each switch and button had been positioned by engineers who understood that pilots might need to access them in complete darkness while pulling 9Gs and fighting for their lives. The F-35's engine spun up with a rising whine that spoke of barely contained power. Maya felt the familiar vibration through her seat as 30,000 pounds of thrust came online, ready to launch her aircraft from zero to supersonic in seconds. On her helmet-mounted display, symbols and readouts painted a complete picture of her aircraft status, every system green, every weapon ready, every sensor tuned to maximum sensitivity. "Control, Phoenix requesting immediate taxi clearance for emergency launch." Maya's voice was steady over the radio, using her personal call sign rather than the official standby designation. If she was going to disobey direct orders and potentially end her career, she was going to do it as herself. The pause before Major Winters responded told Maya everything she needed to know about the chaos her decision was causing in the operations center. "Phoenix Control, you do not have authorization for launch. Return to parking immediately. Control Phoenix. I have a pilot in distress 1,500 miles from home and a tactical situation that requires immediate response. I'm launching under emergency authority." Maya began taxiing before the controller could respond, her aircraft rolling toward the active runway with deliberate purpose. Behind her, she could see vehicles racing across the flight line security, forces responding to what they probably viewed as either a theft or a breakdown. But Maya knew that once her aircraft was airborne, the dynamics would change completely. Military commanders might be willing to ground a rebellious pilot, but they would be much more reluctant to shoot down a friendly aircraft heading toward a combat zone where American lives were at stake. The radio crackled with Colonel Bradley's voice, and Maya could hear the controlled fury beneath his professional tone. "Captain Rodriguez, you will abort this launch immediately and return to base. That is a direct order from your commanding officer." Maya lined up on the runway, her aircraft's nose pointed toward the distant mountains that separated Nevada from the Pacific Ocean. In a few seconds, she would either be a hero racing to save her friends or a criminal who had stolen a military aircraft. The distinction would be determined entirely by what happened over the next few hours. "Colonel Bradley, this is Captain Rodriguez. I understand your concerns, but I have friends in combat who need immediate support. I cannot in good conscience remain on the ground while they fight for their lives without adequate backup." She paused, knowing her next words would define the rest of her career. "I'm launching now." Maya pushed the throttle forward, and 30,000 pounds of thrust launched her F-35 down the runway like a bullet from a gun. The acceleration pressed her back into her seat as the aircraft gathered speed 80 knots, 100, 140. At 160 knots, she pulled back on the stick and felt the magical moment when wings generated enough lift to free her from the bonds of Earth. Climbing through 1,000 feet, Maya could see the lights of Las Vegas glowing against the dawn sky. Somewhere below, Colonel Bradley was probably on the phone with higher headquarters, trying to explain how one of his pilots had just stolen an $80 million aircraft and disappeared into the western sky. But Maya's focus was already shifting to the tactical situation 1,500 miles ahead, where her friends were fighting for their lives. She leveled off at 40,000 feet and pushed the throttle to military power, the F-35's engine driving her westward at nearly the speed of sound. At this altitude, the curve of the Earth was visible on the horizon, and the sky above faded from blue to deep purple. Maya had always found peace in the high atmosphere, in the clean simplicity of flight, where the only things that mattered were physics and airmanship. But today's flight was different. Every mile carried her closer to a combat zone where enemy pilots would be actively trying to kill her, where a single mistake could result in her aircraft becoming a streak of burning metal falling toward the ocean. Maya had trained for this moment her entire career, but training could never fully prepare someone for the reality of combat, for the knowledge that other human beings were using advanced technology and professional skills to end her life. The first radio contact with her squadron mates came when Maya was still 600 miles from the combat area. Lieutenant Morrison's voice crackled through her headset, strained with the tension of prolonged combat. Any station, this is Viper. We have multiple aircraft down, repeat, multiple aircraft down. Alpha 4 is in the water, Charlie 2 is limping home on one engine, and we're still outnumbered 3-1 up here." Maya's blood ran cold. Multiple aircraft down meant her friends were either dead or floating in life rafts in hostile waters, depending on the mercy of search and rescue assets that might not be able to reach them in time. She pushed her throttle past military power into afterburner, trading fuel economy for speed as her aircraft screamed across the Pacific at Mach 1.8. "Viper, this is Phoenix. I'm 600 miles out and closing fast. Give me a tactical picture." The silence that followed told Maya more than words could have. Her unexpected arrival was apparently causing as much confusion among her own forces as her departure had caused at Nellis. Finally, Morrison's voice returned, filled with a mixture of relief and bewilderment. "Phoenix? Maya, what the hell are you doing out here? Bradley's going to have your ass for this." "Bradley can kiss my ass," Maya replied, surprised by the vehemence. In her own voice, "I've got friends in trouble, and I'm the closest help available. Now give me the tactical situation." Over the next 10 minutes, as Maya continued closing the distance to the combat area, Morrison painted a picture that was even worse than she'd feared. What had started as a routine patrol had escalated into a full-scale engagement involving more than 30 aircraft from both sides. The hostile forces had been using the initial encounter as a diversion while positioning additional assets for a coordinated attack on Allied shipping lanes. Lieutenant Santos had successfully ejected from her failing F-35, but she was now floating in a life raft barely 50 miles from hostile territory. Captain Chung's aircraft had taken missile damage and was limping toward a tanker aircraft, but her chances of making it were questionable, and the remaining pilots were running low on both fuel and ammunition after more than 2 hours of continuous combat. "Phoenix, be advised the tactical situation is extremely fluid," Morrison continued. "We've got J-20s, J-16s, and what looks like some kind of new stealth aircraft we haven't seen before. They're coordinating with surface vessels and possibly submarine assets. This isn't just a fighter sweep, it's a full-spectrum military operation." Maya absorbed this information while monitoring her aircraft systems. The F-35's advanced sensors were already beginning to paint a picture of the distant battle. Radar contacts appearing and disappearing as stealth aircraft maneuvered for tactical advantage. She was still 20 minutes away from the combat area, but she could already see the electronic signatures of more than a dozen aircraft engaged in aerial combat. As she closed the distance, Maya began receiving increasingly frantic radio calls from Nellis. Colonel Bradley was apparently coordinating with Pacific Command to understand what one of his pilots was doing in unauthorized combat operations. The calls ranged from official orders to return immediately to increasingly personal pleas for her to reconsider her actions, but the call that changed everything came from an unexpected source. General Patricia Morrison Jake's aunt and the commanding officer of Pacific Air Forces came on the encrypted command frequency with a message that made Maya's heart skip a beat. "Captain Rodriguez, this is General Morrison. I understand you've taken unauthorized action to support American pilots in combat. While I cannot officially condone your disobedience to direct orders, I want you to know that your courage has not gone unnoticed. Bring our people home safely." The message was brief, but its implications were staggering. General Morrison was essentially giving Maya unofficial permission to continue her mission, political cover that might protect her from the worst consequences of her actions. More importantly, it meant that someone at the highest levels of military command understood that sometimes doing the right thing required breaking the rules. Maya's first visual contact with the combat area came as she crested a layer of clouds. At 38,000 feet, the ocean below was dotted with the white wakes of multiple ships maneuvering at high speed, while contrails crisscrossed the sky like a three-dimensional spider web. She could see the flash of missile launches and the brief flares of aircraft afterburners as pilots pushed their engines to maximum power. "Phoenix Viper, I have you on radar, bearing 090, 30 miles out. Be advised, this airspace is extremely hostile. We're tracking multiple surface-to-air missile sites and at least 12 enemy fighters actively engaged." Maya checked her weapon systems one final time: 6 AIM-120M RAM missiles, full cannon ammunition, and an aircraft that represented the most advanced air superiority platform ever created. But she also knew that technology alone wouldn't win this fight. Success would depend on training, experience, and the kind of split-second decision-making that separated good pilots from great ones. As she entered the combat area, Maya's sensors were immediately overwhelmed by the complexity of the tactical situation. Radar contacts appeared and disappeared as stealth aircraft moved in and out of detection range. Electronic warfare systems painted false targets while obscuring real ones. Surface vessels launched missiles that climbed toward the scattered formations of Allied aircraft, adding another layer of threat to an already chaotic environment. But Maya's attention was focused on a single priority: reaching Lieutenant Santos before hostile forces could capture or kill her. The young pilot was floating somewhere in the vast ocean below, vulnerable and alone, depending on her squadron mates to extract her before enemy ships reached her position. All stations, this is Phoenix. I'm declaring emergency rescue priority. Hawk's position is my primary objective, everything else is secondary. Morrison's voice came back immediately. Phoenix, negative. We've got too many threats in the area. You need to help us establish air superiority before we can attempt a rescue. Maya understood the tactical logic, but she also understood something that Morrison might have missed. The enemy forces weren't just trying to win an aerial engagement. They were trying to capture an American pilot and her advanced aircraft's technology. Santos represented both a propaganda victory and an intelligence windfall that could shift the balance of power across the entire Pacific region. Viper Phoenix. Santos isn't just a pilot in distress. She's a strategic asset that we cannot allow to fall into enemy hands. I'm going after her now. Maya rolled her F-35 into a steep dive, descending from the relative safety of high altitude into the chaotic middle altitudes where most of the combat was taking place. Her radar immediately locked onto multiple targets, some friendly, some hostile, some unidentified contacts that could be either. The helmet-mounted display painted targeting information across her visor while her hands worked the flight controls with unconscious precision. Her first engagement came without warning. A Chinese J-16 fighter appeared from behind a cloud formation. Its pilot apparently as surprised to see Maya as she was to see him. For a brief moment, the two aircraft flew parallel courses less than a mile apart, their pilots staring at each other across the void while their aircraft's computers calculated firing solutions. Maya reacted first, rolling inverted and pulling her nose toward the hostile aircraft while simultaneously launching an AMRAAM missile. The Chinese pilot tried to evade, pulling into a vertical climb while dispensing chaff and flares. But the advanced seeker head of Maya's missile tracked through the countermeasures and detonated 20 feet from the J-16's engine intake. Enemy aircraft exploded in a brilliant fireball that briefly turned night into day. Maya flew through the expanding debris cloud, her aircraft shuddering as fragments of metal and composite materials struck her fuselage. But her F-35 stealth coating and advanced materials absorbed the impact without critical damage. Phoenix. Viper. Splash 1 J-16. Nice shooting. But Maya had no time to celebrate her first aerial victory. Her radar was already showing two more contacts maneuvering toward her position, and her fuel gauge indicated that she had perhaps 30 minutes of high performance maneuvering before she would need to find a tanker aircraft or return to base. The next 20 minutes unfolded like a deadly ballet performed at supersonic speed. Maya found herself engaged with multiple enemy aircraft simultaneously, using every tactic she'd learned in 12 years of training while inventing new ones on the spot. She shot down a second J-16 with a close-range cannon burst that shattered the enemy pilot's canopy and sent his aircraft spinning toward the ocean. A third engagement with what appeared to be a new variant of stealth fighter ended when the enemy pilot broke off and disappeared into a cloud bank, apparently deciding that discretion was the better part of valor. But the real test came when Maya finally located Lieutenant Santos. The young pilot was floating in her bright orange life raft approximately 60 miles southwest of the main engagement area, her emergency beacon painting a clear signal on Maya's rescue frequency. But between Maya and Santos were at least 4 enemy fighters and 2 surface vessels that were clearly racing to reach the downed pilot first. Maya's approach to the rescue area required flying directly through the enemy formation, a maneuver that would expose her to fire from multiple directions while limiting her own ability to maneuver. It was exactly the kind of tactical situation that training manuals advised against, the sort of high-risk scenario that could easily result in the loss of both the rescuer and the person being rescued. But as Maya looked down at the tiny orange speck floating on the vast ocean, she thought about Lieutenant Santos's family back in California, about the dreams and hopes that had brought the young woman to this moment. She thought about her own sister Sophia, who believed that her big sister could do anything, fly anywhere, overcome any obstacle that stood in her way. Maya pushed her throttle to maximum power and rolled into a steep dive toward the water. Her F-35 accelerating past Mach 1 as she committed to a rescue attempt that would either save Santos's life or add both their names to the memorial wall at the Air Force Academy. "Hawk, this is Phoenix. I'm coming to get you. Hold tight and be ready to move when I arrive." Santos's voice came back weak but determined. "Phoenix, Hawk, I can see enemy ships on the horizon. They're going to be here in about 10 minutes. Then we'd better make this quick." Maya's F-35 screamed toward the ocean surface at nearly twice the speed of sound, her aircraft's radar painting a clear picture of the enemy forces converging on Lieutenant Santos's position. 2 Chinese Type 055 destroyers were approaching from the northeast, their powerful engines churning the Pacific into white foam as they raced to capture the downed American pilot. Above them, 4 J-20 stealth fighters maintained a protective umbrella, their advanced sensors sweeping the sky for any attempt at rescue. But Maya had advantages that the enemy commanders hadn't anticipated. Her F-35's stealth characteristics made her nearly invisible to most radar systems, especially when approaching from an unexpected angle. More importantly, she was willing to take risks that no sane pilot would consider, driven by a combination of professional duty and personal determination that transformed caution into calculated aggression. "All stations, this is Phoenix. I'm making my rescue approach now. Request immediate fighter sweep of my ingress route." Morrison's voice crackled through her headset, tight with concern. "Phoenix, negative. We're still outnumbered up here and can't spare aircraft for close support. You're on your own." Maya had expected as much. The broader tactical situation remained chaotic, with Allied forces still struggling to establish air superiority against an enemy that had clearly planned this engagement in advance. But flying alone had always been Maya's strength in the cockpit of an F-35. She was limited only by her own skills and imagination. She began her attack run from the southwest, approaching Santos's position at wave-top level to minimize her radar signature. The ocean below was choppy with 6-foot swells, and Maya found herself flying her aircraft like a high-speed boat, adjusting constantly for the turbulence that came from flying in ground effect. Her airspeed indicator showed 540 knots, fast enough to cover the distance to Santos in minutes, but slow enough to maintain precise control in the challenging flight environment. The first enemy ship to detect her approach was one of the destroyers, its sophisticated air search radar finally penetrating her stealth characteristics when she closed to within 20 miles. Maya watched her threat warning display light up as the ship's fire control systems locked onto her aircraft, preparing to launch surface-to-air missiles that could reach her position in seconds. But Maya had trained for exactly this scenario. She pulled her F-35 into a climbing turn while simultaneously launching 2 AMRAAM missiles at maximum range, using her aircraft's advanced sensors to guide the weapons toward the destroyer's radar arrays. The ship's defensive systems engaged immediately, filling the sky with interceptor missiles and electronic countermeasures. But Maya's attack had achieved its primary purpose, forcing the enemy to focus on their own survival rather than capturing Lieutenant Santos. The destroyer's captain was clearly experienced, maneuvering his ship in a series of high-speed turns, while his crew launched clouds of chaff and flares. Maya's first missile was defeated by the ship's close-in weapon system, its 20mm cannon shredding the incoming warhead before it could detonate. But her second missile found its target, striking the destroyer's forward radar antenna and sending fragments of metal and electronics cascading across the ship's superstructure. The explosion marked the beginning of the most intense 15 minutes of aerial combat in Maya's life. The 4 J-20 fighters immediately converged on her position, their pilots demonstrating the kind of aggressive tactics that spoke to extensive training and combat experience. Maya found herself engaged with multiple threats simultaneously, forced to think and react faster than she ever had before. Her first attacker came from above, diving out of the sun in a classic fighter maneuver that had been used since World War I. Maya spotted the attack at the last second and rolled inverted, pulling her aircraft into a negative G maneuver that sent blood rushing to her head, while her F-35's nose tracked toward the hostile fighter. She fired a burst from her 20mm cannon, the high explosive rounds reaching out across 2 miles of sky to find their target. The J-20 pilot was skilled, however, pulling into a vertical climb that took him out of Maya's firing envelope, while simultaneously launching a heat-seeking missile at close range. Maya had less than 3 seconds to react, deploying flares while pulling into a punishing 8G turn that pressed her body into her ejection seat with crushing force. The enemy missile flashed past her canopy, its seeker head confused by the combination of flares and Maya's radical maneuvering. But even as she defeated the first attack, 2 more J-20s were maneuvering into firing positions, their pilots coordinating their attacks to maximize the chance of a successful engagement. Maya realized that she was rapidly approaching the limits of what a single pilot could handle. Even in an aircraft as advanced as the F-35, she needed help, or she needed to change the tactical dynamics of the engagement. The solution came to her in a moment of inspiration that bordered on madness. Instead of continuing to fight defensively, Maya rolled her aircraft toward the ocean and accelerated to maximum speed, heading directly toward the second destroyer while the enemy fighters pursued her. Her plan was simple in concept, but extraordinarily dangerous in execution. She was going to use the ship's own defensive systems against the aircraft trying to protect it. "Hawk, this is Phoenix. When you see me coming, be ready to activate your rescue beacon and prepare for immediate pickup. This is going to get complicated." Maya dove toward the destroyer at maximum speed, her aircraft's radar warning receiver screaming as multiple fire control systems locked onto her signature. Behind her, the 3 surviving J-20 fighters followed in pursuit, their pilots apparently assuming that she was attempting a desperate attack on the surface vessel. But Maya had something else in mind. At the last possible moment, she pulled her F-35 into a vertical climb directly over the destroyer, using the ship as a shield between herself and the pursuing fighters. The destroyer's captain, faced with the choice of shooting at Maya and risking hitting his own aircraft, or allowing her to escape, chose a third option. He ordered his ship's close-in weapon systems to engage everything in the immediate area. Sky above the destroyer erupted in a hurricane of 20mm cannon fire as the ship's automated defensive systems engaged every target within range. Maya climbed through the deadly barrage with inches to spare, her aircraft's stealth coating and advanced maneuvering keeping her ahead of the tracking systems. But the J-20 fighters weren't as fortunate. Caught between their own ship's defensive fire and Maya's unexpected maneuver, 2 of the enemy aircraft were hit by friendly fire and spun toward the ocean in flames. The third J-20 pilot was either more skilled or more lucky, managing to avoid both the ship's fire and Maya's subsequent attack. But he was now alone against an enemy who had just demonstrated a level of tactical innovation that clearly exceeded his training. When Maya rolled out of her climb and pointed her nose at his aircraft, the Chinese pilot apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor. He disengaged from the fight and headed toward home, leaving Maya alone with the 2 surface vessels and a downed pilot who needed immediate rescue. But Maya's victory had come at a cost. Her fuel gauge showed critical levels after 20 minutes of high-performance maneuvering, and her aircraft had sustained minor damage from flying through the destroyer's defensive fire. She had perhaps 10 minutes of combat capability remaining before she would be forced to withdraw or risk running out of fuel over hostile waters. Santos was floating barely 2 miles from the damaged destroyer, her bright orange life raft clearly visible against the dark water. But between Maya and the downed pilot lay the second destroyer, its crew undoubtedly preparing to capture Santos before any rescue attempt could succeed. Maya had one chance to reach her friend, and failure would mean that both of them would end up as prisoners or casualties. Maya's attack on the second destroyer was a masterpiece of precision flying and weapons employment. She approached at wave-top level, using the curvature of the Earth to remain hidden until the last possible moment. When she finally appeared on the ship's radar, she was less than 5 miles away and closing at nearly the speed of sound. The destroyer's defensive systems engaged immediately, but Maya had learned from her previous attack. She varied her altitude and heading constantly, presenting a target that was almost impossible to track effectively. Her own weapons, 2 remaining AMRAAM missiles, and a full load of cannon ammunition reached out toward the ship with devastating accuracy. Her first missile struck the destroyer's bridge, sending a massive fireball climbing into the morning sky. The second hit the ship's main radar array, effectively blinding the vessel's defensive systems. Maya followed up with a strafing run that sent 20-millimeter rounds through the ship's superstructure, systematically destroying communication, equipment, and weapon systems. But the destroyer wasn't defenseless. As Maya pulled up from her strafing run, a shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile launched from the ship's deck and tracked toward her aircraft. Maya saw the missile's smoke trail at the last second and pulled into a desperate evasive maneuver. But the warhead detonated close enough to send shrapnel through her left engine intake. Warning lights cascaded across Maya's instrument panel as her F-35's left engine shut down automatically, its sophisticated systems protecting the aircraft from catastrophic failure, but leaving her with only half her normal power. She was now flying a damaged aircraft over hostile waters, with barely enough fuel to reach Santos's position and no guarantee that she could make it back to friendly territory. But Maya had come too far to quit now. She lined up on Santos's position and began a low-speed approach, her aircraft's remaining engine providing just enough power to maintain controlled flight. Below her, she could see Santos waving frantically from her life raft, her orange survival suit a bright beacon of hope against the endless blue of the Pacific. The rescue itself was a testament to both pilots' training and determination. Maya couldn't land on the water. The F-35 wasn't designed for maritime operations, but she could provide air cover while a rescue helicopter reached Santos's position. The problem was that the nearest helicopter was more than an hour away, and Maya's fuel wouldn't last nearly that long. The solution came from an unexpected source. Captain Chun, flying her damaged F-35 toward a distant tanker aircraft, diverted to Santos's position despite her own critical fuel situation. Together, Maya and Chun established a protective umbrella over their downed squadron mate, taking turns making low passes over the enemy ships to discourage any rescue attempts. "Phoenix, this is Rescue 1, came the voice of the incoming helicopter. "Pilot, we have you on radar, ETA to survivor's position in 45 minutes. Can you maintain cover until we arrive?" Maya checked her fuel gauge and made a quick calculation. With her damaged engine and the fuel she'd burned during combat, she had perhaps 20 minutes of flight time remaining. But Chun was in even worse shape, her aircraft losing hydraulic fluid and running on emergency power systems. "Rescue 1, Phoenix, we'll hold this position as long as possible. But you need to understand that we're both running on fumes here." The next 30 minutes tested every skill Maya had developed in her flying career. With one engine out and fuel running dangerously low, she found herself managing her aircraft's energy like a chess grandmaster planning 10 moves ahead. Every maneuver had to be calculated not just for its immediate tactical effect, but for its impact on her remaining fuel and her aircraft's degraded performance. Chun's situation deteriorated first. Her damaged hydraulic systems finally failed completely, leaving her with only manual flight controls and no power assistance for her control surfaces. "Phoenix, I'm going to have to punch out," she transmitted over the radio. "This bird's not flying much longer." "Negative, Charlie 2. Stay with your aircraft as long as possible. We need to maintain 2-ship coverage until Rescue 1 arrives." Chun managed to keep her crippled F-35 airborne for another 15 minutes through sheer force of will and superior airmanship. When she finally ejected, her aircraft was less than 1,000 feet above the ocean, barely high enough for her parachute to deploy properly. Maya watched her friend descend toward the water, adding another pilot to the rescue priority list. Now alone over the vast Pacific with 2 friends floating in life rafts and enemy ships still maneuvering in the distance, Maya faced the most critical decision of her career. Her fuel gauge showed less than 10 minutes of flight time remaining, barely enough to reach the nearest tanker aircraft if she left immediately. But abandoning Santos and Chun would leave them vulnerable to capture by enemy forces who were undoubtedly closing on their position. Maya's choice was never really in doubt. She had violated direct orders to reach this point, had engaged superior enemy forces single-handedly, and had pushed her aircraft and herself to the absolute limits of performance. She wasn't going to quit now, regardless of the personal cost. "Rescue 1, Phoenix. I'm staying on station until you reach my people. Fuel state is critical, but these are my friends down there." The helicopter pilot's response carried a mixture of admiration and concern. "Phoenix, we understand your situation. We're pushing maximum speed. ETA now 30 minutes. We'll get them." Maya spent her final 10 minutes of fuel flying lazy circles over her downed squadron mates, her damaged F-35 running on vapors and determination. When her engine finally flamed out and her aircraft began its inevitable glide toward the ocean, she was less than 5 miles from Santos's position and could see the rescue helicopter approaching from the east. Her ejection from the crippled F-35 was textbook perfect, a perfect, clean separation from the aircraft, followed by a stable parachute descent toward the Pacific swells. As she floated down toward the water, Maya could see her friends waving from their life rafts and the rescue helicopter beginning its approach. Her mission was complete, even if it had cost her the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. Rescue operation proceeded flawlessly. All 3 pilots were recovered within an hour, exhausted but alive, their survival a testament to training, courage, and the bond that existed between military aviators. As Maya was winched up into the helicopter's cabin, she caught a final glimpse of her F-35 disappearing beneath the waves, taking with it the most extraordinary hour of flying in her life. But the real recognition of Maya's actions came later, as the full scope of her mission became clear to military leadership. Intelligence analysis revealed that her unauthorized intervention had disrupted a major enemy operation designed to establish control over critical shipping lanes. Her destruction of 2 destroyers and multiple aircraft had forced hostile forces to withdraw from the area, preserving Allied access to sea routes that carried trillions of dollars in international commerce. Maya smiled at the question, recognizing the same tactical curiosity that had driven her own development as a combat pilot. "Excellent question, Commander Chun. The key to handling unknown threats is maintaining situational awareness while staying flexible enough to adapt your tactics in real time. We prepare for what we know, but we stay ready to improvise when we encounter something unexpected." She moved to the tactical display, highlighting the mission route with a laser pointer. "Remember, our enemy's greatest advantage is often our own rigid thinking. The moment we become predictable, we become vulnerable. Tonight, we'll demonstrate the kind of adaptive leadership that has made American aviation the most effective force in the world. As the briefing concluded and her pilots dispersed to prepare their aircraft, Maya found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 4 years ago, she had been fighting for acceptance in a world that questioned her right to be there. Now she commanded a squadron that represented the best of what military aviation could become when merit replaced prejudice. Captain Kim approached her as the briefing room emptied. "Squadron leader, I wanted to thank you for everything you've taught me. Your example has shown me that leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about having the courage to act when action is required." Maya placed a hand on the younger pilot's shoulder, feeling the weight of mentorship that came with command. "Captain, the most important thing I can teach you is that every decision has consequences beyond what you can see. Tonight, we're not just conducting a military mission. We're demonstrating the values that define who we are as officers and as human beings." 3 hours later, Maya's squadron launched into a moonless night, their F-35s disappearing into darkness as they headed toward a combat zone where American interests and allied forces faced an unprecedented threat. Intelligence reports indicated that hostile forces had developed new air defense systems designed specifically to counter American stealth technology, creating a tactical challenge that would test every lesson Maya had learned about combat leadership. The flight toward the target area was conducted in radio silence, with Maya's pilots maintaining perfect formation discipline, despite flying through weather that pushed their aircraft to operational limits. Lightning illuminated the clouds around them, creating brief snapshots of their formation before plunging them back into darkness. "Dragon Lead, this is Overwatch," the voice of the carrier's tactical controller crackled through Maya's headset. "Intelligence update. Enemy forces have deployed mobile SAM batteries in your target area. New threat assessment indicates they've integrated their systems in ways we haven't seen before." Maya processed this information while maintaining course toward the target, her mind running through tactical options with the speed that came from years of experience. Unknown threats required careful analysis, but they also demanded the kind of innovative thinking that had defined her career from its earliest moments. "Copy, Overwatch. Dragon Squadron will adapt tactics based on observed threats. Maintain Overwatch and be prepared to relay updates as situation develops." As they approached the target area, Maya's radar warning receiver began displaying contacts. That didn't match any known threat systems. The enemy had indeed developed new capabilities, creating an air defense network that combined traditional surface-to-air missiles with what appeared to be directed energy weapons designed to disrupt aircraft electronics. "Dragonflight, this is Lead. We're seeing new threat signatures. Switch to combat spread formation and prepare for electronic warfare countermeasures. Remember your training, trust your instruments, and stay flexible." The first hostile contact came without warning, a flash of directed energy that briefly disrupted Maya's flight systems before her aircraft's defensive measures could compensate. But instead of the panic that might have overwhelmed a less experienced pilot, Maya felt the familiar calm that settled over her during combat situations. "Dragonflight, we're dealing with directed energy weapons integrated with conventional SAMs. Captain Kim, take Dragon 2 and 3 and establish a high-altitude overwatch. Commander Chun, bring Dragon 4 through 6 and follow my lead for a low-altitude approach." We're going to demonstrate the kind of tactical flexibility they weren't expecting. The mission that followed showcased everything Maya had learned about leadership under pressure, innovative tactics, and the importance of trusting the capabilities of well-trained pilots. Her squadron adapted to each new threat with the kind of fluid coordination that came from months of training under her guidance, turning what could have been a disaster into a textbook example of how superior training and leadership could overcome technological disadvantages. Captain Kim's Overwatch element provided critical intelligence on enemy positions, while Maya's low-altitude team neutralized the directed energy weapons that posed the greatest threat to follow-on forces. Commander Chun's section eliminated mobile SAM batteries with precision strikes that minimized collateral damage, while maximizing tactical effectiveness. But the moment that would be studied at military academies for years to come occurred when Maya detected an imminent threat to Allied ground forces that hadn't been part of their original mission briefing. A column of enemy armor was moving toward a position held by American Marines, and the closest friendly assets were still 30 minutes away. Prepara y nerar es tipo de historia, nos ha llevado largos esfuerzos y trabajo duro. Así que si estás disfrutando de la historia, por favor, considera suscribir en nuestro canal. Overwatch, this is Dragon Lead. I have eyes on enemy armor moving toward Checkpoint Alpha. Estimate company-sized force with main battle tanks and armored personnel. Carriers. Request immediate clearance to engage. The response came after a pause that felt longer than the few seconds it actually lasted. Dragon Lead, you are cleared to engage targets of opportunity. Be advised that enemy air assets may be responding to your location. Maya felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with high-stakes combat situations, but this time it was tempered by the confidence that came from years of proven experience. She was no longer the young captain fighting for acceptance. She was a seasoned combat leader responsible for both mission success and the lives of her pilots. Dragon Squadron, new mission priority. We have Marines in trouble, and we're the only assets in position to help. This is what we trained for, and this is why we're here. Let's show them what American pilots can do when our people need us. The attack that followed demonstrated the evolution of Maya's tactical thinking from her early days as a wingman to her current role as a squadron commander. Instead of the individual heroics that had marked her rescue of Captain Santos, this mission showcased coordinated teamwork that maximized the capabilities of every pilot under her command. Dragon Squadron's attack on the enemy armor column was swift, precise, and devastating. Using tactics that combined stealth approaches, coordinated timing, and innovative weapon employment, they neutralized the threat to Allied forces while maintaining the element of surprise that kept enemy air defenses from effectively responding. But as they prepared to return to the carrier, Maya's radar warning receiver detected incoming aircraft that her electronic systems couldn't immediately identify. The enemy had responded to their attack with air assets that appeared to be using the same kind of advanced technology they'd encountered in the ground-based systems. Dragon Flight, we have unknown aircraft approaching from multiple vectors. Combat spread formation, weapons free, and remember that everything we've trained for comes down to the next few minutes. The air-to-air engagement that followed would be analyzed by military historians as a perfect example of how superior training and tactical innovation could overcome numerical disadvantages. Maya's squadron was outnumbered nearly 2-to-1, but they were flying the most advanced aircraft in the world under the command of pilots who had been selected and trained for exactly this kind of situation. Captain Kim demonstrated the tactical instincts that Maya had recognized from their first meeting at weapons school, using terrain masking and electronic warfare techniques to engage enemy aircraft from advantageous positions. Commander Chun showed the kind of aggressive precision that had made his sister a legend among fighter pilots, destroying multiple targets while coordinating with his wingmen in a display of teamwork that maximized their combined effectiveness. But it was Maya herself who provided the decisive moment of the engagement. Detecting an enemy formation attempting to flank her squadron, she made a split-second decision to break formation and engage multiple targets simultaneously, using tactics that pushed both her aircraft and her own skills to their absolute limits. Maneuver was risky to the point of being nearly reckless, but it was executed with the kind of precision that came from years of combat experience and an intuitive understanding of her aircraft's capabilities. Maya's attack disrupted the enemy formation at the critical moment, allowing her squadron to gain tactical advantage and eliminate the remaining threats. Dragon Lead, this is Dragon 2. Captain Kim's voice carried a note of admiration as the engagement concluded. That was some of the finest flying I've ever witnessed. Request permission to buy you dinner when we get back to the boat. Maya smiled inside her helmet as she surveyed the tactical situation and confirmed that all her aircraft were undamaged and all her pilots were safe. Permission granted, Captain. But first, let's get everyone home safely. Overwatch, this is Dragon Lead. Mission complete. All objectives achieved, returning to base with full squadron integrity. The flight back to the carrier gave Maya time to reflect on how far she had traveled from that morning 4 years ago, when she had been a young captain, struggling for acceptance in a world that questioned her capabilities. Now she commanded respect, not because of her gender, but because of her proven ability to lead under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. As Dragon Squadron approached the USS Gerald R. Ford, Maya could see the deck crews preparing for their arrival with the kind of professional efficiency that defined naval aviation operations. The carrier's lights cut through the darkness like a beacon, representing not just safety and mission completion, but the values and principles that had guided her throughout her military career. The landing aboard the carrier was routine by the standards of naval aviation, but Maya felt a deep satisfaction as her F-35 touched down on the deck with the precision that came from thousands of hours of training and experience. She had brought every pilot under her command home safely while completing a mission that would enhance American security and protect Allied forces around the world. Later, as Maya debriefed the mission with her intelligence officers and prepared her after-action report, she found herself thinking about the young woman who had first put on an Air Force uniform with dreams of becoming a fighter pilot. That woman had faced skepticism, prejudice, and institutional barriers that had seemed insurmountable at the time. But she had also been supported by mentors like General Morrison, who recognized potential regardless of gender, challenged by opponents like Colonel Bradley, who eventually became allies, and inspired by peers like Captain Santos, who shared her commitment to excellence under pressure. The knock on her cabin door came just after midnight, interrupting Maya's work on her mission report. She opened it to find Captain Kim standing in the passageway, with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that mixed exhaustion with the kind of satisfaction that came from successful mission completion. "Squadron leader, I brought you something." "To help with the paperwork," Kim said, offering one of the cups. "I also wanted to talk about what happened out there tonight." Maya accepted the coffee gratefully, recognizing that these informal debriefs were often more valuable than the official reports she would file with higher command. "What's on your mind, Captain?" Kim settled into the small chair across from Maya's desk, her expression serious despite the late hour. "I've been thinking about the decision you made to break formation and engage those flanking aircraft. From a tactical standpoint, it was the right move, but it was also incredibly dangerous. How do you calculate those kinds of risks when lives are on the line?" Maya considered the question while sipping her coffee, recognizing the same hunger for understanding that had driven her own development as a combat pilot. "The truth is, you don't calculate risks in the traditional sense when you're in that situation. You have milliseconds to process multiple variables and make a decision based on experience, training, and instinct." She paused, looking out the small porthole at the dark ocean surrounding their ship. "But the real answer is that some risks are worth taking when the alternative is watching your people get hurt. Tonight, if I hadn't engaged those aircraft, they would have been in position to attack the rest of you from your blind spots. That wasn't a risk I was willing to accept." Kim nodded slowly, understanding the deeper lesson that Maya was trying to convey. So leadership isn't just about making the safe choice, it's about making the right choice, even when it's personally dangerous. "Exactly." And that's a lesson I learned from someone who risked everything to save my life when I was in a similar situation years ago. Leadership is about understanding that your personal safety comes second to the welfare of the people under your command. Their conversation continued for another hour, covering topics that ranged from tactical innovation to the evolution of military culture over the past decade. But as Kim finally returned to her own cabin, Maya found herself thinking about the broader implications of her career and the changes she had witnessed in military aviation. 5 years later, Colonel Maya Rodriguez stood at the podium of the Air Force Academy, addressing the graduating class of 2032 as their commencement speaker. The auditorium was filled with young officers who represented the future of American military aviation, their faces reflecting the diversity and capability that had become the hallmark of modern military service. But Maya's attention was drawn to one particular graduate in the front row, Second Lieutenant Sofia Rodriguez, who had followed her sister's path into military aviation with the same determination and skill that had defined Maya's own career. Sofia's presence at the academy represented not just personal pride, but the success of efforts to create a military culture based on merit rather than tradition. "Ladies and gentlemen of the graduating class," Maya began, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of combat leadership and proven excellence. "You are entering military service at a time when the nature of warfare is changing faster than ever before. The challenges you will face require not just technical competence, but moral courage and the willingness to think independently when situations demand it." As she delivered her remarks, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a young captain fighting for acceptance to a squadron commander respected throughout the military, her career had been defined by a willingness to challenge assumptions and prove capabilities through performance rather than politics. The most important lesson I can share with you is this: true leadership isn't about following orders blindly, it's about understanding when the mission requires independent judgment and having the courage to act on that understanding. There will be moments in your careers when doing the right thing requires you to risk everything, including your career and your reputation. After the ceremony, Maya found herself walking across the academy grounds with Sofia, whose excitement about her upcoming pilot training was evident in every word and gesture. The young woman who had once worn a miniature uniform to watch her sister's promotion was now a commissioned officer with dreams of her own. "Maya, I want you to know that everything I've achieved has been inspired by your example," Sofia said, as they paused near the cadet chapel. "You showed me that barriers exist to be overcome, not to define our limitations." Maya felt a deep satisfaction as she looked at her sister, recognizing the same determination that had driven her own career, while also seeing the confidence that came from growing up in a world where gender was no longer a barrier to military service. "Sofia, the most important thing I can tell you is to never let anyone convince you that you don't belong where your skills and dedication have taken you. The military is better when it includes the best people, regardless of their backgrounds. And you've proven that you deserve to be here." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of General Patricia Morrison, now the Air Force Chief of Staff, whose support had been crucial to Maya's career development over the past decade. The general's presence at the academy graduation represented the culmination of efforts to transform military culture from the inside out. "Colonel Rodriguez, I have a proposition for you," General Morrison said with the kind of smile that suggested significant news was coming. "How would you feel about taking command of our newest and most advanced fighter wing? Full authority over tactical development, training protocols, and deployment decisions for the most sophisticated aircraft in our inventory." Maya felt her pulse quicken as she processed the implications of the offer. Wing command represented the pinnacle of military aviation careers, the position that gave her the authority to shape the future direction of American air power while leading thousands of personnel in the most challenging missions imaginable. "General, I would be honored to accept that assignment," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the excitement and responsibility that came with such a significant command. As they discussed the details of her new position, Maya found herself thinking about the young captain who had once stolen an F-35 to save her wingman's life. That act of courage had been driven by instinct and moral conviction, but it had also set in motion a chain of events that had transformed not just her own career, but the entire culture of military aviation. 10 years later, Wing Commander Rodriguez stood in the command center of Nellis Air Force Base, overseeing the most advanced fighter training program in the world. The facility around her represented the cutting edge of military aviation technology, where pilots from around the globe came to learn tactics and procedures that would define air warfare for decades to come. But the real transformation wasn't in the technology, it was in the people. Maya's command included officers from diverse backgrounds who had been selected, based purely on their capabilities and potential, creating a meritocracy that maximized the effectiveness of American air power while serving as a model for military organizations worldwide. The intercom crackled with a message that brought Maya back to the present moment. Wing Commander, we have an incoming priority message from the Pentagon. Secretary of Defense requesting immediate conference call regarding your next assignment. Maya straightened her uniform and walked to her private office where secure communications equipment allowed her to speak directly with the highest levels of American military leadership. The call that followed would determine the next phase of her career and her continued impact on the evolution of military service. Colonel Rodriguez. This is Secretary Martinez. The voice was clear despite the encryption that protected their conversation. I'm calling to inform you that you've been selected for promotion to Brigadier General and assignment as the Air Force's Director of Combat Operations. This position will give you authority over tactical development for the entire service. Maya felt a moment of profound satisfaction as she processed the magnitude of the opportunity being offered. The position represented not just personal achievement, but the chance to influence the direction of American military aviation at the highest levels of command. Mr. Secretary, I am honored to accept this assignment and promotion. I look forward to serving the Air Force and our nation in this new capacity. After the call ended, Maya sat quietly in her office, reflecting on a career that had exceeded every dream she had harbored as a young woman, first putting on a military uniform. From fighting for acceptance to commanding respect, from rescuing wingmen to leading wings, her journey had been defined by a consistent commitment to excellence and moral courage. The knock on her door interrupted her reflections, and Maya looked up to see Brigadier General Sofia Rodriguez entering her office with the kind of confident bearing that had become her trademark. Sofia's own career had flourished under the merit-based system that Maya had helped create, leading to her current assignment as the Air Force's youngest general officer. Congratulations on your promotion, General Rodriguez, Sofia said with the formality appropriate for their official relationship, before breaking into a smile that reflected their personal bond. I wanted to be the first to tell you that your example has inspired a generation of officers who never had to fight the battles you fought. Maya stood and embraced her sister, feeling the weight of legacy and the satisfaction of knowing that the changes she had helped implement would continue long after her own retirement. The military that Sofia served in was fundamentally different from the one Maya had entered 2 decades earlier, transformed by the actions of individuals who had been willing to challenge assumptions and prove their worth through performance. Sofia, the most important thing I've learned is that real change comes from demonstrating excellence consistently over time. Every mission we've flown, every challenge we've overcome, and every barrier we've broken has been part of a larger transformation that benefits everyone who serves. As evening approached and the base settled into its nighttime routine, Maya found herself walking the flight line where rows of F-35 sat ready for the next day's training missions. The aircraft represented the pinnacle of military aviation technology, but they were just tools in the hands of the men and women who had committed their lives to defending American interests around the world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to demonstrate leadership under pressure, and new chances to mentor the officers who would carry forward the values and principles that had guided Maya's entire career. But tonight, she was content to stand in the Nevada desert, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky, and reflecting on a journey that had transformed not just her own life, but the entire institution she had devoted her career to serving. Young woman who had once dreamed of becoming a fighter pilot had achieved something far greater than she had ever imagined. She had helped create a military culture where the next generation of dreamers would be judged by their capabilities, rather than their circumstances, where merit would determine opportunity, and where moral courage would continue to define the best traditions of American military service. As Maya finally turned to head back to her office, where reports and planning documents waited for her attention, she carried with her the satisfaction that came from a life lived in service to principles larger than personal ambition. The battles she had fought had been won not just in the cockpits of advanced fighter aircraft, but in the hearts and minds of leaders who had learned to see potential wherever it existed, regardless of the package in which it came. The story of Maya Rodriguez was complete, but the changes she had helped implement would continue to shape American military aviation for generations to come, ensuring that courage, skill, and dedication would always be the true measures of a warrior's worth.